I'm here today with Ben Carpenter, who is the Vice Chairman of CRT Capital, an incredible entrepreneur, and author of The Bigs. And Ben, cannot thank you enough for taking the time to sit down with me today. Really, really appreciate it. Before we begin and before we talk about your career and your book, which is fantastic, let's talk a little bit about what your life was growing up as a kid.
Well, it was an interesting time growing up. Somewhat uniquely, we ended up moving a great deal. My father was did not have a successful business career, and in fact, he kept getting fired from his job. And the first time that happened was when I was 9 years old, and then that continued to happen every couple years until I went away to college. And the reason why that kept occurring wasn't because my father wasn't hardworking or intelligent. He's very intelligent, very hardworking, and very well educated. He had an undergraduate engineering degree as well as an MBA, both from Northwestern. But my father had chosen a career path that he was ill-suited for. And he decided that he wanted to be a manager of people. And he was really a solitary person with little emotional capabilities and capacity to connect with others. And if you want to be a manager, that's a very tough handicap to have to work with.
Then you went to Bowdoin College, and how was that experience?
I had a great time at Bowdoin. I had a great time academically, athletically, socially, and romantically. That's where I met my wife, Lee. She was a freshman. I was a sophomore, and she had been on campus for all of 2 days. And I saw her across the room at a fraternity party, and something came over me. I ran across the room, pushing my way through the crowd, and when I got to her, I threw aside the boy that she was talking to, who happened to be my best friend, and that was the best timed and most important act of aggression I ever perpetrated upon anyone, because 8 years later we got married, and we've now been married for 29 years.
That's great. That is tremendous. And how did you decide to go into Wall Street?
When I was at Bowdoin, I didn't have a strong opinion about what I should do, but I really liked my criminal law and constitutional law courses, so I thought maybe I'd be a lawyer, but I decided that I'd at least go work in business, or try to, for a couple years before I went to law school. And that's how I ended up going to Bankers Trust Company.
Got ya. And then you eventually worked your way up to the CEO or co-CEO role at Greenwich Capital, which is a phenomenal firm. Tell us how you navigated that, because that's a tricky process for anybody to go from essentially a junior position to working your way through the field of folks and becoming the CEO.
I first went to Bankers Trust in the Empire State Building, commercial lending, and did that job for 2 years. Liked it, but realized after that period of time that I wanted a job that had more excitement and chance for more compensation. So I got a job at Bankers Trust on their trading floor, selling treasury bonds. Did that for 3 years. Loved that job. Everything I hoped it would be. Worked at Morgan Stanley for 1 year, and then got a job at Greenwich Capital, where I stayed for 22 years. And when I got there, I was a salesman, then I was a trader, then sales manager, co-chief operating officer, and finally co-CEO. And I think the most important aspect of that journey that I had at Greenwich Capital was when I was a trader. I had sold for a couple years, and my boss, the founder of the company, Ted Netzger, said that he thought that I had done a good job selling, and that they wanted to leverage my talents further, and for me to be a trader. And I was really excited about this, because I always wanted to be a trader, and I knew that I was going to be a terrific trader. And so I enthusiastically accepted the job. And for the next 2 years, I proved myself to be maybe one of the worst traders in the history of Wall Street. It wasn't that I lost the most money, because I was a junior trader with junior trading limits, but I just couldn't make any money. And so at the end of 2 years, it was obvious to Ted, myself, and really everybody at the firm that I had to do something different. And the one thing that I knew is that I didn't want to go back to selling as a failure. I was open to doing anything else at the firm aside from going back to sales. And right about that time, Ted pulled me aside and said that that he had an idea for me, and that he wanted me to be the CFO of Greenwich Capital, the chief financial officer, and one of the top 5 officers of the company. When I heard that, I was really excited because this was the greatest example of failing upward I had ever heard of in my life, and it was happening to me. But I did tell Ted that I wanted to think about it a little bit, and it's a long story that ties in with my health to a significant degree. But at the end of the 4 weeks, I went back to Ted and I said that I didn't want to be the CFO, and that the job that I actually wanted to do was to go back to sales, which was the exact job I had said that I didn't want to do just a few weeks before. And what had happened was, when I looked in the mirror, I realized that I had a deep-seated need to get back to doing something that I was good at and that I could contribute to the firm at, and that was sales. And I went back to sales with a renewed appreciation for doing something that I was good at and a renewed determination to really contribute to the firm. And I think that that attitude, combined with doing something that I was good at, allowed me to become the sales manager, co-chief operating officer, and finally the co-CEO. And I am confident if I had taken Ted up on his generous offer to be the CFO, I wouldn't have been able to lead by example and lead from strength, and I would never have gotten to become the head of the company.
During your tenure at Greenwich Capital, you talked about your wife and meeting her and pushing your friend out of the way. All I can say is thank God, because she pretty much saved your life when you had a very serious heart condition. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, in 1992, I was sitting at my desk. It was towards the end of my period of time as a trader, so I'm sure I wasn't in a particularly good mood, but I felt fine. And, I'd always played sports and I had always had confidence in myself physically. But that day in October of 1992, it felt like my chest exploded. And I asked my good friend Morris Sachs to take me to the hospital. And when we got there, the doctors ran all sorts of tests and I wasn't having a heart attack. They didn't know what the problem was. And they did call Lee, and she arrived, my wife, and after she had been with me for a brief period of time, I was in absolute agony at this point physically, and I turned to her, from lying down in bed, and said that I loved her and the girls, but this was pretty serious. And the minute I said that, she ran out into the hallway and, really yelling for the doctors to come, because she interpreted what I said correctly as I was dying. And she went out in the hallway, got the doctors to come back in. They refocused on what was going on with me and decided they couldn't handle whatever it was at Greenwich Hospital, got me on a helicopter up to Yale, New Haven, and the doctors at Yale, New Haven said that I got there with literally minutes to spare. So it's not an exaggeration whatsoever to say that my wife, Lee, saved my life.